Good evening. I'm Belva Davis, and welcome to This Week in Northern California. Joining me on our news panel are Scott Shafer, host of the California Report on KQED Public Radio, and Josh Richman, legal and political affairs reporter with the Oakland Tribune. Well, Josh, has the message of the Occupy movement taken a turn? Has it taken hold politically?
Well, I think that people far and wide across the country and around the world have to be listening to what the Occupy movement is saying by now. I think in terms of here in California, I think the governor had a plan for a while, and I think that the rhetoric of the Occupy movement is now giving him some cover to put that plan into action. What happened this week is that the governor rolled out a plan for an initiative that he wants to put on next November's ballot to raise taxes on millionaires and high-income earners. Nobody making less than $500,000 is going to see any tax increase under his plan, except that an income tax. There is a temporary half-cent increase in sales taxes as well he wants to put forth. And he estimates this would raise about $7 billion to be spent only on education and public safety, which are obviously things that the public is very strongly in support of generally. You know, in terms of whether Occupy is to credit for this, it's hard to say exactly. I can tell you that a recent poll here in California found that about 58% of California voters agree with protesters' underlying reason for being out there in the streets. These questions of income inequality and insufficient funding for government services and so on and so forth. And we have a new poll out just this week which shows that the middle class in California has shrunken enormously over recent years. The poor have gotten significantly poorer. The gap between the rich and poor has widened. All of which we sort of knew, but the numbers are kind of striking, and I think that does provide some fuel for the fire for Jerry Brown's tax initiative and the others that are out there in the field, too.
Josh, we saw this week President Obama giving a speech in Kansas where he sort of embraced the basic ideas of the Occupy Wall Street movement without saying it specifically. Jerry Brown has said nothing about the Occupy Wall Street movement. Is there any evidence, when you look at the plan that he rolled out this week, is there evidence about what was in there or what wasn't in there that, you know, suggests that it really did have an impact on him?
Well, you know, like I said, I think this was his plan all along. You know, I think he intended to propose a tax on millionaires and was going to do that whether or not people had taken to the streets and plazas and parks this fall or not. But I think, you know, whether he's embracing Occupy or not, if his rhetoric is the same, then it's kind of hard to tell the difference between. You know, only he can speak to his own motivation. I think he might want some political cover from directly embracing Occupy, given what's happened in some of our California cities and college campuses over the last couple of weeks. But he's certainly, in an economic sense, he's sort of showing his colors on this, I think.
So this looking east to New York, Governor Cuomo also made a change of position over what he had proposed at first, and that was keeping him. Or letting a tax sunset.
That's exactly right. You know, the New York had a sort of a millionaire's tax, a surcharge that was bound to expire. The governor and the legislature were going to let that happen. And although their plan sort of let everybody declare victory, perfect political plan, right? Basically, instead of netting the $4 billion that the expiring surcharge on the very affluent in New York would have brought, they'll get about half that, about $2 billion. Which is better than nothing as far as these underfunded services are concerned. New York has a budget deficit, had a budget deficit of about $3.5 billion, which of course to us in California seems like chump change. But you know, New York has embraced the need for some sort of taxation. There's talk on the world stage of imposing some sort of tax on trades of stocks and bonds and other financial instruments, which is an idea that's been visited briefly here in the United States before. Pete Stark had a bill to tax currency transactions last year. The bill went no place. But there's some rhetoric going on out there from very diverse quarters, from people like Bill Gates, Pope Benedict, Al Gore, you know, a lot of, well.
Sounds like the beginning of a joke.
It does. They all walk into a bar with a tax, right? But I mean, definitely, again, something, you know, very populist sort of idea. that sort of plays on the outrage that we've been hearing against the financial sector all along.
I mean, so what Jerry Brown said this week is that he's going to go out and collect signatures to put this thing on the ballot. But at the same time, we've got probably going to be on the ballot a tax on gas and oil production. There's going to be a tobacco tax. There's another group altogether talking about an income tax.
There's actually two other groups talking about income tax initiatives. There was another proposal advanced this week by the California Federation of Teachers and some progressive groups to do a straight-up millionaires tax with no sales tax increase. And there was the Think Long Committee plan that was rolled out last month, the language of which is still sort of in flux a little bit, but Nicholas Bergruen, who's a billionaire financier who sort of bankrolled this bipartisan committee to come up with this plan, is promising to spend $20 million or more to advance that taxation plan on next year's ballot. So we're facing a situation where we could easily get some voter fatigue from all of these competing initiatives.
Well, the movement was at first, how we found out about it, of course, and knew about it, was the pitching of tents. And so we have the tents have all been taken down at this point.
Not in Berkeley. I think Berkeley may be the last stronghold. But yes, San Francisco got cleaned out this week, early Wednesday morning. More than 80 people arrested, 142 tents cleared. There is an action coming up on Monday, not a tent occupation, but a proposed blockade of the Port of Oakland and all the other West Coast ports. I think we're planning for a significant number of protesters out there. Police today indicated that they will not allow these protesters to get into the Port of Oakland as they were allowed last time. So it should be interesting to see what happens on the streets in Oakland Monday.
It looked for a while, a couple weeks ago, that it was going to shift to the campuses. You know, the UC Berkeley, there was that huge turnout, and students, of course, are really affected by tuition increases, and they're graduating with huge debt, and the job market is terrible. Did that kind of fizzle?
I think there's some action right now in City College of San Francisco and San Francisco State, but things have quieted down at Berkeley and Davis, where you had those very publicized incidents, and I think there's a wait-and-see sort of attitude in a lot of those places now.
Well, wait and see fits the the headline for this next story, because it's another incremental move in the Proposition 8 battle. So there was a court hearing, Scott, this week.
There was at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, a federal panel of 3 judges. It's the long and winding road of Proposition 8. And this week there were 2 issues: whether or not to release the videotapes of the trial. That's kind of a separate issue. The second one that was more important and interesting is the judge in the case, Judge Vaughn Walker. After he retired, he revealed in an interview that he was gay and that he was in a 10-year relationship with another man. And so the proponents of Prop 8 said, well, wait a minute, you should have disclosed that. You had a conflict of interest. And so they were in court this week arguing to this panel of judges that that he should have at the very least said whether or not he intended to get married. And he got a hard time from the judges. The attorney for Prop 8 making this case. And we have a clip of Charles Cooper, who was one of the attorneys that argued, responding to a question from one of the judges, Randy Smith, about why this judge should have had to disclose this information. And here's what he said.
The cases that make clear that the burden is on the judge. It's on the judge to disclose information known only to the judge that might be relevant, would have potential relevance to the question whether or not the judge has an interest in the outcome of the case.
The point being that, you know, he ruled in a case that potentially he had an interest in. Now he might get married. But the other side, the Prop 8 opponents, were saying, no. You know, if that's the case, then then a heterosexual judge who's sitting in on a divorce case, does he have to disclose, for example, whether is he married? Is he thinking of getting a divorce? Does he have a rocky relationship? I mean, just how much information should a judge have to reveal? And David Boies, who was the attorney for the opponents of Prop 8, said that you really have to leave it up to the judge to decide whether or not it's relevant to the case. And here's how he described that in the argument.
Then what you are doing by the rule that Mr. Cooper advocates, simply creating a double standard, and it is going right in the face of the cases that have repeatedly held that minority judges, just like majority judges, are presumed to be impartial. And that if you...
So making that case that, you can't have one set of rules for gay and lesbian judges and another set of rules for everybody else.
And this whole question of conflict starts at the highest court in the land.
It does. The U.S. Supreme Court, this has been an issue for years. Antonin Scalia went duck hunting with Vice President Cheney and then ruled on a case involving one of his friends. There's more recently, you've got Clarence Thomas, whose wife is very active in the Tea Party. And of course, there's a huge case involving the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, coming up. And there are people saying, well, he should recuse himself from that. And also, Justice Kagan has interest in that law as well. She was the Solicitor General in the administration, the Obama administration. So, it's this question of, can they set aside those biases and that information and judge the issue fairly?
And there's one other issue.
There is the other issue, which is the videotapes. The trial was recorded. The judge at the time, Vaughn Walker, same judge, gave an assurance that those tapes would not be released. But then the proponent said, well, wait a minute, the trial is over. There's no reason not to release them so that we can have transparency. And the lower court judge agreed. Now this panel of judges is going to decide whether or not to release those tapes. My sense from the hearing this week is that they are not going to unseal those tapes. The judge made a promise not to release them, and I think they're concerned about the integrity of the judicial process. I think those tapes will not be made public.
Well, it was interesting that the panel of judges allowed the tape to be taken of the hearing where they were going to get to decide this.
They did. Well, the Ninth Circuit tends to be much more friendly to cameras than other courts. Certainly the Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court does not really, they're not ready to have cameras. They feel that, that clips like the ones we just saw can be used and taken out of context.
Well, my thanks to both of you for joining us here tonight.